Welcome back, everyone, to Pencils and Lipstick. This is episode 208. And if you're on YouTube, the sun is setting because I recorded this and didn't turn on my mic, but that's fine. We are going to re-record this intro. Today, we have a fabulous interview with Gabriela Pereira. She is the instigator and founder of DIY MFA. I've sort of been around different circles with Gabriela for probably 3 years now. I really respect what she does. I love listening to her whenever she's giving a workshop or teaching something. I'm always sure to be there and listen to her. She knows a lot. I have a lot of respect for her and her knowledge on storytelling and being an author. So I wanted to have her in here to talk about DIY MFA. We talk a lot about storytelling and maybe why you would get an MFA, but why you might not want to and just join her program instead, which sounds fabulous to me. But her membership program, The Hub, is going to open December 4th. So as this goes out, it is November 27th. So you have time to click below on the DIYMFA.com/join link, or you can just type it out in there now, but you can click on it in the show notes below and get on the newsletter in order to find out when those doors are open. So the doors are only going to be open between December 4th and December 14th. You should probably get on her newsletter because it's a fabulous newsletter. So Gabriela Pereira is an author, speaker, and a self-proclaimed word nerd who wants to challenge the status quo of higher education. Her mission is to empower writers to apply an entrepreneurial mindset to their professional growth. Gabriela earned her MFA from the New School in New York. While undercover as a graduate student, she learned the inside scoop on MFA programs, invented a slew of writing tools, all her own, and developed a new, more effective way for writers to learn their craft. Now she shares what she discovered and helps writers around the world get the knowledge without the college. I love that. So without further ado, let's get into the interview with Gabriela, and you can hear from her more about this program.
Lead.
Okay, everyone, we are here with Gabriela Pereira. I am excited because I've seen her around a lot, especially once I started becoming very involved in writing and wanting to be in this indie author scene. Hello, Gabriela. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me here.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I think we know many people in common, like
Yes.
Nicole and Tracy and Daniel and so many people, but this is our first time actually chatting ourselves. So you are, I know you mostly because you're the creator, I guess, of DIY MFA. So before we get into that, could you tell us a little bit about you personally, and then we'll get into like your writing life?
Yeah, so I am Gabriela Pereira. I'm the founder and instigator of DIY MFA, which is the do-it-yourself alternative to a Master of Fine Arts in Writing. Basically, what I do is I help writers get the knowledge without the college.
I
Um,
like that. Or without the the debt.
So that's essentially it. I mean, we
Yeah.
basically have taken the curriculum that most traditional MFA programs
Oh, wow.
use, and we've sort of rejigged it in a way that makes it more accessible, more affordable, and also just more practical, that covers things that are more that go beyond just the sort of literary scene, and
Yes.
focus on things like author platform and stuff like that as well.
Right. So if nobody knew that you could get a master's in finance, like why would somebody go back and get that? I mean, some people have it. I personally think it sounds marvelous, but you just get to dissect, I don't know, writings all day long, but what what is the reason that people would go to college and get that master's?
So there are a lot of different reasons why someone would get a Master of Fine Arts. Probably the reason that I hear most often is this idea that writers want to really dedicate themselves to the craft. And
Okay.
it's this idea that you're taking, 2 or 3 years and you're kind of carving out that time and you're really doing a deep dive into the writing and you're sort of focusing in on that. That's all well and good. It's wonderful if you've got 2 or 3 years. I've got two
Right.
small children at home, so I can't exactly take 2 or 3 years to go off and do some writing in a cabin in the woods or something.
Sounds
You
great
know,
though.
it's it sounds delightful, but it's pragmatically not
Right.
feasible for a lot of people.
Right.
The other reason that a lot of people tend to get MFA program or MFA degrees is because they want to teach writing. So the
Oh, okay.
MFA makes it such that you can, if you get a teaching job, if you're able to get a teaching job, you can teach at the college level.
Oh,
So I
okay.
have a lot of colleagues who have graduated with their MFAs from the same program that I went to, who have gone on to become adjunct professors, et cetera. The
Okay.
problem with that is that there is a huge, overwhelming number of people who are graduating MFA programs, all of whom want to become adjunct professors. And
Uh,
there's a very small number of adjunct professorships available. So
right.
unless you're one of those lucky few and you happen to have connections or you happen to know people and you're able to kind of navigate those waters, it can be kind of a tough gig to get
Right.
into the teaching in a traditional program. Obviously,
Okay.
you can always be teaching independently, which is what
Sure.
I opted to do. But it's, for if you wanted to get a job like in a college or something like that, you can do that with an MFA program. You don't necessarily need a PhD in creative writing in order to teach.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's interesting. So, did you specifically go to get because you wanted to teach writing or because you wanted to learn more about writing? Because I've heard that some people, like, their whole project is an actual book. Like, they leave the
Yes.
MFA with a book. Is that true? Okay.
Yes. So like in the MFA program, the last semester that at least in the program that I was in, the last semester that we had was our thesis semester. And so that semester, basically you write your book, whatever the
Interesting.
book is going to be that you're
Okay.
writing. And it's a little akin to like NaNoWriMo or something, because you're writing like, an entire book in like three
Yeah.
months. So maybe not quite the same pace, but it's pretty intensive pace because you're trying to get through as much of your book as you can.
Right.
And you also have to write a literature thesis. So you have to do a whole like analysis of a body of literature and things like that, which is, in my opinion, that was the fun part. Like I had way
Okay.
more fun with the analysis than I did with the writing, the creative writing.
Oh, that's interesting. That sounds like a lot of work though, because like you were saying before, you have to have that time to
Exactly,
get all that
exactly.
done.
Like it's really intensive. And there were a lot of people in my program. So the program that I went to had it was, all the classes were at night so that people could actually have day jobs.
Oh my
But
word.
then when do you do your work? When do you actually do your writing?
Yeah.
So it was, I had a couple of friends who had day jobs during the MFA, and it was challenging. It was a lot
Right.
of hard work.
Right. I'm sure when you finish it, you feel very proud of yourself as you should. But that sounds like you're in it. Probably like any master's, right? At the end of it, you're supposed to apply everything you've learned into 3 months. Uh, and even I think that sounds even more intense than NaNoWriMo because you have to hand it over to somebody to be judged. So like
Yes.
at
Yes.
least
In
one professor,
fairness,
right?
we didn't have a thesis defense. Like I actually had I have two masters. I have a master's in psychology also. And when I
Oh
got my
wow.
master's in psychology, we actually had to like defend our thesis in front of a panel of
Oof.
professors. And that was really terrifying, let me tell you. Even though they were all my advisors, they were all rooting for me, they all wanted me to do well, but it was still really scary. So at least in the MFA program that I attended, there wasn't that, thesis defense kind of scenario. You just wrote your book and your advisor signed off on it, and then
Thank
you called it a
goodness.
day.
Like, well, I guess at anything you write, you have that panel of, they're called reviewers. So you have
Yes.
those people, but at least you don't see their faces and you don't have to like hear them in words, their critique of you. So when you finished your MFA, what did you want to do? And then how did that differ from, or did it differ from what you ended up doing?
So DIY MFA actually took me by surprise.
Okay.
So it was not my intention to start a company and to start a movement. Like that was not my plan. I was doing this MFA in writing for children. I had a manuscript of a middle grade novel that I was really excited about. There was an agent who was excited about it. I was ready to like go and submit it and all of that good
Right.
stuff. And then I got this wacky idea, like, what if you could DIY your MFA? And that idea kind of took hold. And it actually happened during graduation. Like I was sitting in
Oh my
graduation and I was thinking to myself, you know, like I'm expecting like the light to stream in through the stained glass windows of the rickety church where we're having the graduation ceremony. And I'm expecting like the skies to part and angel choirs to sing and all of that stuff. And none of that happened. And instead, this like wacky idea just popped into my head. And I thought, like, what if you could DIY it? And so I
Yeah.
went home. I did what any self-respecting writer would do. I went home and I blogged about it. And this was back in
Right.
2010, where blogging was like the thing.
The thing I remember, I would wake up
Yeah,
every
right.
day to
Like
read my
everyone had
favorite
their
blogs.
blogs. Yeah. And so I went home and I blogged about it. And I figured, you know, it was going to go out into the ether and nobody was going to pay attention to it. And it was just going to be, you know, it was going to fizzle out. And instead, what ended up happening was the next day I had like 25 emails in my inbox and like another 25 comments on that blog post. And let me tell you, I had 12 followers and one of them was my mother. So like, I don't know where these people came
Wow.
from,
Oh my
but
gosh, that's
it
funny.
it really showed that like this post like really got hold of people, and this idea of, you know, DIYing your MFA really resonated. And so then I started, this was right at the, you know, in springtime, like it was I think June-ish. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to run an experiment and I'm going to see where this project goes. So I set aside my middle grade novel and I decided, you know, there at the time, especially, there were all these challenges. You know, you had like the blogging the alphabet challenge in April, and you had like, you know, Camp Nano in the summer and all of
Right.
that, and NaNoWriMo in November. And so I figured like I'd do my own little challenge. And it was a challenge to myself where I was going to blog every single day for the entire month of September about DIY MFA. And I figured
Interesting.
if I got to the end of September and I A, still had things to say about it, and B, hadn't driven away all of my followers, then maybe there was something to this idea.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
I got to the end of September and I was still like going strong, with excited about the idea, excited about the concept. And my followers went from 12 to like 400 in the course of the month. So
Oh,
I was
wow.
like, okay, maybe there's something to this. So I mindfully set aside my middle grade novel yet again. It'll probably reemerge someday in the future. But at the moment, it's still in the bottom drawer. And I decided to sort of dedicate myself full time to this
Yeah.
concept and to see where it went.
Yeah, and just so that everyone remembers, 2010 was like the years of Skype. So,
Yes.
like there was, and Instagram wasn't around. I think maybe Instagram was a baby at that point.
Yeah, I think Instagram was like 1 year old or something like that.
Yeah, it
Was
had the
really,
funky filters, and I mean
yeah,
it
yeah,
wasn't we didn't think about using it for business. You had like
exactly.
Facebook, Twitter was a baby if
Yeah, Twitter
ish.
was like, I remember I got on Twitter in like 2008,
Yeah.
and that was like early-ish.
That's when you could
Uh,
like actually talk to famous writers because they were on there
I
and they
know, right?
answered.
You could like tweet somebody and like they'd actually know who, like they'd tweet you back and you'd be like, oh my gosh, they.
I know. I did it to like everyone. I was like, oh my gosh, they actually answered. Now
Well,
you
to
can't
give you
find
an
anyone.
idea of how like low tech things were back then, when I ran my early semesters of our flagship course, our DIY MFA 101 course, our calls, which are now run on Zoom, were actually done over a phone like party line. Like it was
Oh
one of
my
those
gosh,
like
yes.
conference lines where you like, you know, please punch in your code, and you
I've
punched
been
in your
in one of
code.
those classes. Yes.
And it
Yes.
was like that for semesters. I mean, it was like that for several years until Zoom came on the scene. And then I was like, oh, we can actually do this and like see each other. This is so
Yeah.
much better.
But that's so cool that you kind of got beyond the barriers, of like figuring out how could you do this because otherwise maybe you would only be able to do it locally, which
Exactly.
does not grab everyone that might be interested in this. So how did you go from, okay, everyone's interested in your blogging, but you have to create a curriculum and then find people who are willing to do the work and join the curriculum. So what was that process like?
So I love building curriculum. If
Okay.
there's like one thing that I could do all day and not get sick of it every single day, it would be building curriculum. It
Well,
is
that
my
helps
absolute
definitely.
favorite thing. And so when I did that experiment, basically I thought of it as a curriculum. And so,
Okay.
I knew that like I was going to have to blog for about 4 weeks, right? Because September is 30-day month, 4 weeks ish. And so I figured, like, why don't I break it down by days of the week? So we had like
Mm,
Monday, I think, was creativity day, and Tuesday was the craft, and Wednesday was reading, and Thursday was workshops. And, so like each of the days of the week had their sort of topic.
mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of topics because there were 7 days in the week. So there were like a lot of different, branches to DIY
Right.
MFA. And then once I kind of got into like the guts of the curriculum, I started seeing how certain things fit into similar buckets. So I realized that like
Okay.
you could have, and so basically DIY MFA went from having like 7 or 8 different categories to going down to 3. So
Okay.
basically DIY MFA consists of 3 things: write with focus, read with purpose, build your community. And so those
Interesting.
3 buckets, everything else kind of fit into them. So creativity, productivity, craft, those are all in the writing bucket. And then like reading literature and all of that good stuff is in the reading bucket. And then platform and workshops and conferences and community, that's all in the community bucket.
Okay.
So that's sort of how I built it out. Like at first it was sort of this big sprawling thing. And then I started like
Right.
whittling it down until I finally got it to a point where it was a manageable thing. Then from there, it was just a matter of like figuring out what are the main components. Like if I'm going to build a course, I knew I wanted the course to be manageable. So I couldn't be much longer than, like, I figured 10 weeks was the maximum.
Okay.
And so I figured, like, what are the 10 topics that absolutely have to go into this course? And so I broke those down, and those became that course became our flagship 101 course.
Okay. And so what do people need? I mean, I assume with an actual traditional MFA, you would have most likely writers already, right? People who have some sort of experience. Is that true, or am
To
I
some
really off?
degree, sometimes
Okay.
you have folks who are pretty new, but you have to
Interesting.
apply. So, like, you have to at least have written enough that you can submit your, portfolio or whatever they call it.
Sure, sure. So how does that differ with your course? Like, are people beginners? Are they like, how do you see those new entries into your flagship course?
So I'd say that the majority of people who come into and I'm talking about our flagship
Hmm.
101 course, because we have more advanced courses, but those, like, people have to have been in the writing space for a while.
Okay.
But in our flagship course, which is sort of our foundational program, it's about half and half newbies and people, writers, what I call writers in the trenches,
Mm,
writers who are like in the thick of it, writing a project or working on a book, or maybe they have a book in the bottom drawer, but like they're working on their next book or something like that.
right. Okay.
And so that generally tends to be the group of people. What's really awesome is that now students who were like newbies when I ran the course back in 2014 are now getting published and getting like their
Awesome.
books out. And
Yeah.
it's really cool to see these writers who I knew like when they started, and now they're
Yeah.
like, they're out there and they're doing it and they're making it
That's so
happen.
fun. So what do you what can you almost I don't want to say promise, but what would you say people leave with? Like, and how is it different than, I mean, there's so many courses of finish your book or,
Right.
some are good and some are, I'm not sure how anybody gets through them. So how does it really differ having like that MFA perspective in your course?
So, what writers get out of the DIY MFA foundational program is that they learn how to create an MFA style life. So
Okay.
it's not just that you're getting in, you're getting information, or you're getting out, although you
Right.
are getting a lot of information, and it is designed to be used by writers who are in the trenches. So it's not just busy work. It's designed to sort of be amplifying and collaborating with the work you're already doing. But
Okay.
the idea really is for writers to kind of rejig their whole outlook on the writing life and to
Oh, I like
really
that.
build these three fundamental concepts into their writing life. So the writing, the reading, and the community. And I'd say the thing that really differentiates and makes DIY MFA stand out is the reading component, because there are a
Yeah.
lot of programs out there that talk about community, or at least have community attached to the program. And
Mm.
there's a whole heck of a lot of programs that are all focused on the craft and on productivity and on mindset and all that good stuff. Amazing stuff, but that there's a lot of it out there. But there's not a whole lot of people talking about reading.
Yeah.
And what we do at DIY MFA is we really break down like what is going on in a writer's brain when they're reading a piece of text, and how can you make your brain do that and then translate that into your own writing.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So I think you're right. And my next question was going to be why the reading? So I've been through a couple courses where it's very interesting to have that reading, especially if, I went into linguistic sciences
Mhm.
for college, and you almost miss that. So I would
Yes.
assume a lot of us haven't done this since like literature 101 of college, if like possibly high school. So and a lot of people will say read your genre. Like that
Yeah.
might be like the extent of the reading. So um why do we need to keep reading? What do we need to keep reading? And how are you teaching it that it's not just us, you know, reading a novel for leisure?
Right. So, for starters, the way you read as a writer, you're not going to read an entire book that way because it's
Mm,
exhausting.
okay.
And, I've been told by a lot of writers and students of mine that I've like ruined reading for
Yeah.
them because now they like read books and they're like, I can't turn my writer brain off. And I'm like, yes, mission accomplished. But the whole idea is for you to be able to turn off that writer brain and
Okay.
be able to read for pleasure and enjoy your reading. But when you come to a part of your reading that is important, like you notice
Mm,
something, that little like alarm bell goes off in your brain, and you're like, ooh, that's interesting. Look at what
okay.
that author did there. Then you have the tools to be able to unpack that and to really dig in and analyze it. And
Okay.
really what it comes down to is, this is my like formula for how to read like a writer. You basically ask one question: how does the what reflect the why?
Okay.
That
Oh, that's
question is literally everything. Everything that you need to analyze, you can analyze with that question. So you might ask yourself, like, if a writer is using an image of water in their writing, you might ask them yourself, like, why is this water image? How does this water image reflect the way the character's feeling in this scene?
okay.
How does the what reflect the why? So like you
Yeah.
just sort of replace the how and the what and the why with whatever the things are, the thing you're analyzing, and then the sort of meaning behind it. And
Yeah.
once you have that question, then it's just a question of analyzing it, of sitting down and thinking it through and coming up with an answer.
That's a pretty concise answer to why does some settings in um some stories in books or things work and why do some not? Like you have
Exactly.
like that gut feeling where you're like, why are they telling me this? Or you have that gut feeling of like, that's beautiful imagery.
Exactly. And so then what you would do is you'd break it down and you'd look at, like, one of the settings that you're like, what the heck are they doing here? And
Yeah.
you'd say, like, okay, how does the image of the tree reflect what the author's trying to say in this passage? How does the image
Interesting.
of the frog reflect how the author is trying to and you dissect it, like you slice and
Mm,
dice the passage so that you really get into like the word level analysis. Like for me, that's the part that I love with literature,
okay.
is getting into that like word level analysis and figuring out, like, why did the author use
Yeah.
that word?
Yeah.
Because I know,
So,
like, when I'm writing, I'm worrying about that one word too, So
right.
like if I'm doing that, then clearly the author's also doing that. So
Yeah.
why did they choose that one word?
Yeah, that's I think was it Fitzgerald who like spent or it was one of them in the 20s that spent like 20 days just trying to figure out the one word and
Yeah.
driving his editor insane. He's like, just find another word, you know. Maybe that's a myth, but I like the story. So do you find it like how do you read? What do you bring to this 10-week and it sounds like this DIY MFA flagship course? Like are how many books are you reading? Or are you reading short stories? Are you just reading passages? Or like because maybe somebody's listening and they're like, that sounds like more hours in the day than I have to just read literature.
So the literature is its own unit. So within
Okay.
the course, we have like modules that are writing focused at the beginning, and then we
Mm,
have our reading focused modules. They're sort of like a palate cleanser in the middle. And then we have the community focused modules at the end.
okay. Okay.
And in the reading piece, you build your own reading plan.
Oh,
So writers are, and that's the whole idea of like writers building the MFA into their life. It's like you have to be smart and be thoughtful and really think through how, how can I make this sustainable? Because yes,
okay.
you could read 20 books in a semester, but that's not sustainable. You're not going to be able to do that like consistently for a long period of time. But if you pace yourself and you say like, yeah, I could read a book every 3 weeks, then, that's, not for nothing, that's like 15, 20 books that you might read in a year.
Right.
So that, right away, you're like already kind of building, and you're doing it in a way that's sustainable for yourself, that's sustainable around your writing.
Okay.
And the other thing that we emphasize at DIY MFA is that there's no set reading list. So it's
Mm.
not like the professor gives you the syllabus and says, read these books. It's that you make your own syllabus. And there's a whole
Oh,
methodology on that I've developed on how to put together your own syllabus so that you balance it out and make it so that you're reading in your genre, but you're also reading other things and you're balancing comps with other books and classics and yada yadas. So
interesting.
like there's a whole system for like, that's actually one of the lessons in the reading plan is the figuring out how you're going to put together your own syllabus. But the
Okay.
whole idea is for writers to be able to build the reading into their lives in a sustainable way so that they can do it for the long haul and not just, flash in the pan, do it for a few weeks and then it's over.
Yeah, like look at that one year I read all those books and then it never happened again.
Exactly.
Um, so do you ever have somebody like renew their love for classics because of this or like for different literature for different genres? Because I feel like we're forced to read certain books in school which we aren't old enough to really understand, nor do we analyze them like you've just laid out. And sometimes we can end up hating certain genres or certain like, oh, I can't stand the classics or whatever. So have you ever had somebody sort of, I don't know, fall in love again with different genres or anything like that?
Well, I've definitely had writers fall in love again with reading. Like
Okay.
a lot of writers who are like, I know I'm supposed to read, but I've kind of fallen away from it. And then like they just get really into it. And these are the writers who then say, like, you've ruined reading for me. Like now I can't stop reading like a writer. And it's so awesome. And I can't wait to do more of it. So it's yeah, a lot of like writers. I mean, it's funny, the reading piece of our curriculum is the piece that like nobody really wants. It's just
Yeah,
kind of tucked in there. But everybody, like hands down, every student that I talk to about this say that that's their favorite part of the entire course.
that's so
And that's the
interesting.
piece that they like wish would never go away. Like
Yeah,
it's really funny.
because I have heard other people say, you should read your genre and you should look at it like an editor or, try to analyze the story, like how did they plot it out, or try to break it down and things like that. But it sounds to me like you're really getting to a level of it just sounds a bit different. It's a level deeper maybe, like not so mechanical, but trying to figure out how they did it in order for it to become almost second nature as I go
Exactly.
and try to write my stories.
Exactly. I call it reading like a revolutionary,
Oh, I like
that
that.
you're like, because a lot of us are taught to read, we're sort of taught to read in two different modes. A lot of
Okay.
us are taught to read like collectors, we're collecting the information and like, okay, these are the characters and these are the plot points and these are the images. And this is a lot of like what, my kids, for instance, when they have to answer questions about like, they read a chapter in the class book and then they have to answer like, what was Susie saying in chapter 4? And it's collecting information, right?
Right.
And then what happens when you're usually like in high school, college, in grad school, you start reading like a philosopher and you're like philosophizing about like, what was the author feeling and what was the going on politically in that era and blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And it's very highfalutin and whatnot. And that's all well and good, but it doesn't really get you into the guts of like what's happening on the page.
Right.
And so the reason I call it reading like a revolutionary is that you're sort of turning the paradigm on its head. You're looking at the reading and you're asking yourself, okay, if they did it that way, how can I do that too? Right. And you're trying to like sort of borrow what you're seeing in what you're reading and applying it to your own writing.
Yeah, which makes sense when your editor comes back and is like, don't just stick stuff in your story. And you're like, yeah, but you told me to add setting. Like we say a lot of these words and phrases in this world, as editors, as writers, whatever, and it doesn't always make sense, but I like how you're breaking it down of like, have it mean something, like have it have a why, not just
exactly
a what, which that makes sense, that it's simple, it's applicable. I like things like this. So what would you say to people who might be writing certain genres, who I think I've heard from some who just don't like the idea of reading various pieces of literature because they're not trying to write a literary novel. So how do you think it can help, grabbing classics and grabbing all sorts of genres, as you said, as they're building this? How can it help them if they're writing, let's say, contemporary romance or YA fantasy, which is huge now, or any other genre?
So first and foremost, I'm going to share a rule that I have, and it is a rule that I first implemented it. Actually, it started in grad school. I had this professor who came in one day and he like handed us the syllabus and he's like, you're going to hate most of the books on the syllabus. So and he also brought like 2 bottles of wine. So like I was just already like, all right, cool, I'm with you, guy. But he was like, you're going to hate most of the books on the syllabus. So I have one rule. You have to give it a shot. You have to read the first 10 pages. Okay. And then if you can't get past the first 10 pages, you can stop. But you have to be able to explain to me in class why you stopped reading the book. And I thought to myself, that's like really respectful of my time, because a lot of professors give you like junk to read and you're just like, why are you making me read this book and like spin my wheels because it's pointless. Right. And I also thought it was like, that was really smart because he was making it such that like, yes, we had an out, but we had to still explain why we didn't like the book, why the book wasn't resonating with us. So I kind of took that model. I borrowed that from my professor when I started doing my podcast, DIY MFA Radio, where there was a period of time where we were just doing interviews all the time. And it was just, I was doing like 3-4 interviews a week. And it was exhausting. And I would be interviewing these authors and I'd read their books. And so I got to a point where I was like, I can't get past like the first, chunk. Like I physically cannot read. There are not enough hours in the day for me to read an entire book. Right. And so I instituted the 10% rule. And this 10% rule has continued on. So with the podcast, I would read at least the first 10% of the book. And now this 10% rule has also carried out into my regular reading, where if by the time I get to 10% of the book, and Kindles are nice because they tell you like exactly the percentage too. So like once I get to that 10%, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I can put this book down if I don't like the book. But with that, like you give the book a fair shake, but then if you can't get past 10%, you can put it away. Like, and you can put it away guilt-free and say like, I'm not going to finish this book. It is not for me. So I would like recommend for writers who are feeling like, they don't want to read literary fiction, or they don't want to read, outside their genre because they worry that they're going to waste their time if they're reading
Hmm.
outside their genre or whatever. They don't want to read classics. Give a book a shot. Give it 10%. 10% is not going to take you that long. Like, it probably will take you like 45 minutes to read
Right.
10% of an average book. And
Hmm.
so, give yourself 10%. And then if you don't like it, you've tried it. And now you know you don't like it, and you can try something else.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that I always recommend writers think about is that different genres are good at different things. So,
Okay.
like, romance is really good at character development.
Right.
So, if you want to understand characters' motivations and character development, reading romance can be a really great way to do that.
Mm.
Thrillers are amazing at pacing. So,
Right.
if you have a pacing problem in your book, pick up a thriller and read a thriller.
Yeah.
World building. If you've got world building issues, pick up a historical novel, pick up a sci-fi novel, pick up a fantasy novel. Like, those books are really good at world building. So
Right.
there are all these different like genres that kind of have their thing. Like, also, like, if you're really, you need to figure out like the little like maneuverings of a plot. Mysteries are your jam. Like, that's what you need to be reading if you need to figure out like all the chess moves that you want your characters to make in a story. So, like, think strategically too, and think about like, what are the problems you need to solve in your own project, and
Right.
then read the things that are going to serve you. Like, don't just read, like, I don't read things willy-nilly. I read things like knowing that they're going to be strategically helping me with whatever I want to read.
Oh, which is what you help your students do when they're creating their reading syllabus.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the whole idea of like, when you're putting your reading list together, you want to be thinking about all these things and thinking about like, what is it that I need to be accomplishing in my own writing? And
Okay.
then what are the types of books that I could be reading that could, fill those gaps for me?
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. I mean, I have picked up thrillers lately, and I'm like, oh, look at that. They easily skip 5 days. And I don't
Exactly.
even care as a reader. Like, so it's fine. I can just implement these little tricks. So
Exactly.
I assume that the writing part, you're probably pretty adept at helping people learn to write, to get better at writing, because you have your MFA, you've written books before, uh, all the things like that. Is there anything about that part of the flagship course that you want to talk about?
Yeah. So my approach to teaching writing, everything at DIY MFA is a little bit like outside the box. And so
Okay.
my approach to, the fact that we focus so heavily on reading, the fact that like, we're sort of taking this MFA angle, et cetera. So I have a background in graphic design. And before I even went into writing and into this field, I was actually a designer. And
Okay.
so I think of everything visually, and I think of them in like mental models, like in diagrams, like pyramids and Venn diagrams,
Right.
and, matrices with like, crisscross and things like that. And so that's how I process the craft. And so
Okay.
that's how I teach the craft. So,
Interesting.
like, when we talk about revision, we talk about revision with a pyramid. When we talk about like point of view, we look at Venn diagrams and like the different Venn diagrams explaining how different types of point of view operate. When we
Okay.
talk about world building, we look at like sort of a bullseye kind of a diagram with like a small
Interesting.
circle in the center, and then it kind of ripples out.
Okay.
So, like, everything that's craft related at DIY MFA tends to have some sort of a mental model attached to it.
Right.
And that's sort of the foundation, like, that's sort of the little out of the box thing that sort of ties everything together.
That sounds very helpful because I would assume most writers are visual. You know, I would assume so. Like that would just maybe help us break it down because you can say editing. And I was talking to a friend the other day and she's like, editing. Yeah, I know it'll take me this long. But the truth is, it's like, can I break it down to what kind of editing am I doing? First, I have to do the developmental. Then you're not going to do the proofreading before you do the story edit and just like page by page, like the hand, then the computer, then the possibly, like it's a lot more than just that word. I'm editing, you
Well,
know.
and even in like the developmental edit stage, or like before you get to a developmental editor, you're just revising yourself.
Right.
There are different layers that you want to focus on. Like you don't want to just go in with a red pen and like, mark up chapter 1, because you might end up trashing chapter 1 and starting in chapter 2. And that just, you
Right.
just waste a whole lot of time marking up chapter 1 and changing all the grammar when you could have just like skipped that.
Right.
So,
Right.
there's like a whole process, like the pyramid method has a whole process of like step by step what you do, starting, at the most foundational aspects of your
Mm,
editing and your
right.
revision, and then getting to like the finer and finer details as you go up the pyramid.
Interesting. I like that. So does somebody have to come with like a partial book or a whole book, or do you also work with short story writers? What kind of writer and what do they need to bring?
It runs the gamut. And we've
Okay.
had, I mean, for the most part, writers tend to be writing novels, or at
Okay.
least they tend to want to be writing novels. But we've had a lot of poets in the class.
Oh,
We've
nice.
had a lot of essayists in the class, memoirists in the class. Um, what else? Short story writers in the class, short story writers who then decide to write novels, novelists who then decide to write short stories, all sorts of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So it really, I mean, that's the whole MFA idea, is the DIY MFA concept, is that it's not about learning to write a specific thing. It's not about
Right.
the thing, it's about the
The
process. And
process.
it's
Yeah.
about building that sustainable process into your life.
Right. Which goes, like you said, you have not only the craft, but you have the community and then just
Exactly.
building like your author life, which I think is something that we don't talk enough about because you might finish your novel, but you usually want to then write another one,
I know.
like, and not every month is NaNoWriMo, and not every semester your kids are doing well in school, right? So,
Right.
so you're actually teaching a sustainable way to possibly be a writer the rest of your life.
Exactly. Exactly.
Interesting. So then what does the community, I mean, it sounds wonderful just to be surrounded by other writers, like, and to be exposed to their writing, but what else does the DIY MFA include in that community pillar?
So the community has sort of two sides to it. There's the actual community. So, like, we have community calls, we run study halls, we have Facebook groups so that people can be connecting, asynchronously. And obviously, not everybody can make a Zoom call because we have people around the globe. And so sometimes
Right.
it's like 2 a.m. for
Yeah.
somebody when it's a call time. But so there's that piece of the community where the students can sort of become their own community. And one of the
Okay.
things that we do with this program is that it's cumulative, in the sense that, like, once you're in for life, and you can keep
Oh,
taking the course again and again,
oh, cool.
as many times as you want. So students who are alums, like, we've had alums who maybe took the course in 2014, and then they're like, I'm coming back in 2022, and
Oh,
just like they
nice.
hop back in. And it's just open for whoever's been in any of the previous cohorts to continue coming back. So there's this nice mix also of alums and new students. Like, usually it's about 50-50 on the calls of like students who are alums and students who are new.
Okay.
So like the new students can also be learning from their alums who are maybe like a half step ahead of where they are right now, and can kind
Sure.
of, help them along and give them some advice and whatnot.
Sure.
So there's that piece of the community, but then there's also the, like, actually teaching people some of, like, how to navigate certain types of community elements.
Okay.
So for example, there's sort of three pieces of community for writers. There's community with your peers, there's community with regard to your platform, and there's community with regard to publishing. And
Oh,
so we kind of hit all three of those
right.
things. In fairness, we don't go super deep into self-publishing or indie publishing, because I don't have experience in that. Like, I'm traditionally published, so
Hmm.
I obviously can't teach something that I have not done myself.
Sure.
But in terms of like everything else, the community with your peers, we talk about things like, how do you navigate a writers conference? Like, how do you actually network? And
Sure.
because a lot of writers are introverts and they're kind of nervous about putting themselves out there. So
Right.
I'm also an introvert, even though it might not seem like it on a call like this, but I'm very introverted. And so, I have all these little, like, tips and tricks that I've used to kind of help break the ice and help kind of
Right.
navigate and figure out how I'm going to, get through whatever networking thing I need to do.
Sure.
Things like navigating a workshop. Like if you want to put together a critique group, how do you run a critique group? How do you put it together? How do you find people? How do you like actually figure out, how to manage the critique group
I
and
was gonna
whatnot?
say, how do you get people to do the work?
To do the work and to submit things and all of that. And so there's all of those types of things that are like the peer level
Okay.
things. And then
Yeah.
we do a primer on platform, even though we have an advanced course that's only dedicated to platform. I felt like it would have been a disservice to our new students if they
Sure.
didn't at least have like the basic knowledge, like at
Yeah.
least have an idea of what's coming down the pipeline, so that
Right.
even if they're not ready to start building their platform yet, they're not going to be blindsided because
Right.
they, didn't know what was coming.
Right.
And then with the publishing side of things, we look at things like, how do you submit to literary magazines? How do you write a query letter? Like, how do you navigate all of those sort of typical publishing things? Like, how do you submit guest posts if you want to like get your name out there
Right.
and things like
Right.
that?
Right.
So
So even if you're following the traditionally published route, you still need to build a platform. You still need to, I mean, I know you have to write query letters still, but what has changed, I guess, since 2010 to now? What is expected of you? Because I feel like we had the idea that if you were traditionally published, you get to just go back to your writing office and write more.
oh no, no, no. No, unfortunately not. If you're traditionally published, publishers are going to expect you to promote your book. And so you need to
Okay.
have a platform. So even though the publisher may have a budget to be able to support you in
Okay.
promoting your book, the thing is, no one is ever going to be as good an advocate for your book as you are. Like,
I like that.
not
Yeah.
even your publicist, not even your agent, not even no matter how much your agent loves you, they're still not going to be the best advocate for your book. You are the best
Right.
advocate for your
Right.
book.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, it puts the control, it puts the writer in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And having that ability, like I actually am very much in favor of writers having more liberty and having more room to be able to play in that marketing space, because I feel like it empowers writers. It
Yeah.
means that writers are now the ones who can be driving the bus, as opposed to just sort of having the publisher doing whatever and you're just kind of like nodding and
Yeah.
going, okay.
Like, thanks, thanks, thanks. Yeah, I feel like there was a point of like, yeah, you just had to do whatever. I remember Brandon Sanderson was telling his publisher, "Why are you pulling out a giant ad in the New York Times when that's not my reader? Like,
Right.
I'm a fantasy writer. Like, most likely New York Times, are not reading my book. So it's a waste of money." He was trying to help his publisher, and
Yeah.
his publisher's like, "Oh no, this is how we do it." So like
Yeah.
you're right, it puts you more in the driver's seat. But to your other point, you have to then know how to navigate conferences and
Right.
asking to be on podcasts. and,
Exactly.
and that's hard for us introverts, isn't it? Like,
It is, but it gets easier the more
mm,
you do it. Like
this
it
is
in the
true.
beginning, it's nerve-wracking, but then you kind of get in the swing of it and it just gets easier. So
It does.
like writers who are watching this or listening to this and are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm gonna what? I have to promote my book now.
Right.
It's it starts out feeling like a lot, but then it becomes more manageable the more
Yeah.
you do it.
And I can imagine being in a group like DIY MFA, you're kind of already practicing that with your
Yeah.
fellow writers. And so you can kind of get the nervousness out a little bit. And you're right, the more you practice it. I mean, I've been doing this for 5 years. I think the first 2 years, I would, be so nervous. I would be sweating every single time I would interview other people, because it's a new thing, right? So, but the more you do the new thing, the easier it is. And weirdly enough, it's hard to talk about our books at first, right? It takes practice.
It is. And the other thing I was going to say from what you were saying is if you speak with confidence, people will believe you. So
Mm.
I remember like when the DIY MFA radio was like an itty bitty baby podcast back in 2014. And we had like no interviews or anything on there. Like we had like 2 interviews. And I would go to, back in the day, there was a conference or an event called Book Expo, where all
Mm.
the publishers would be in the Javits Center in New York City. And it was this big thing. And like you could basically walk from booth to booth. It was amazing as a podcaster because you could basically get connections to the publicists at like all the different publishers
Oh,
in a
wow.
day. It was
Oh, wow.
amazing. And this was like, DIY MFA radio was like nothing at the time. And I would walk in, I had like my little one sheet with like, graphics and like explaining, what our podcast stats and like what our show was about. And like the 2 guests that we had before, like listed on there. And I'd walk in and I'd be like, hi, my name is Gabriela Pereira. I'm the founder and instigator of DIY MFA. We also have a podcast called DIY MFA Radio. I'd love to talk to you about getting some of your authors on the show. And the publicists would all be like, oh yeah, we've heard of that. And I'm like, no, you
Really?
haven't. Like,
Okay.
really?
You're like,
Like, really? You've heard of me? Like,
like, you're lying, but that's okay. I still
it's
want your authors.
no, I mean, it's sweet. It's sweet. But like at the same time, I was just like, really? Like, and so a lot of that was just like walking in with confidence and
Yeah, that's
being like,
true. Yeah.
I knew what I could bring to the table. And so
Yep.
if you believe in your book and you know that what you're bringing to the table is worthwhile and
Yes.
valuable, and then
Yes.
you just speak with confidence, people are going to believe you more often than not.
Right, right. Which I would assume a lot of people leave your flagship course and your courses afterwards with a lot more confidence, just as a writer and in their work, right?
Exactly. And I think going back to what you were saying before about sort of practicing that, I think like also having that community behind you and knowing that
Right.
there are like people who are rooting for you. And I
Yes.
mean, it's really sweet. Like I can't remember if this was in our flagship course or if it's in our membership, but like people, when a writer would like publish their book, like other students would read their book and like be
Yeah.
talking about their book on calls and saying like, I just finished so and so's book and it's so good. And like there's that sort of collegial vibe of like supporting each other, which is just
That's
really
so nice.
cool.
That's so nice because I feel right now it's like swimming with sharks at the moment. Like everyone that you don't know out in TikTok world and Goodreads world, like they're looking to give you the 1 star. Now maybe that's just like from my, vantage point, but some reviewers are really intimidating. So it would be nice to have that group of people who are like, no, no. It's just not the book for them. Your book is, I liked your book. I'm not looking to hate it. I read it
Exactly.
for what it was, right? Yes,
Exactly.
it's that's good for someone's mental health, I feel like. That would be good. So what is it as we go into December and we're about to go into 2024, which is insane? What is it that DIY MFA is offering writers? Can you just jump in whenever? Do things start at a certain time? How are you guys going into 2024?
So our flagship course and our other courses, we have a couple of other courses that we offer like the platform course. We also have a course on creativity and it's called Creative Flow.
Oh,
And
cool.
so those courses are all courses that start at a specific time.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because we want people to have that collegialness and that
Right.
cohort, that
Right.
continuity of being able to like be part of the community and whatnot.
Sure.
So those courses only open up at specific times throughout the year. But what we have that sort of runs year round is our membership program. Now,
Okay.
our membership program only opens up to new members like once or twice a year. I think twice a year right now is what we do. And one of the times that we're opening it up is going to be in December right now. So
Oh,
that's,
wonderful.
if folks are interested, that's definitely something to have on your radar.
And so what can they expect from the membership? Is this like a dipping their toes into what DIY MFA has to offer? Is it something completely different than the courses? How is it different?
So the membership is, and it's called the Hub. So the
Oh,
Hub is designed to complement our courses, but it can
okay.
also be something that you do sort of as a, just on its own.
Okay.
But basically it hits those same three pillars. So like there's writing related resources. So we have a whole library of webinars and mini courses and all sorts of stuff
Oh,
that
wow.
some of these things are offered with our courses and some of them are like completely dedicated just for the hub. We have a whole archive of like over 80 interviews from our summits that we've done. So all
Wow.
of our past summits are archived in there. And then we have regular calls. So we have one craft related call every month and one sort of community discussion call every month.
Oh, cool.
And so that's like the community really continues through the hub. Like the hub really started because the courses would end and people would be like, I don't want this to be over. And so I was
Right.
like, what can I build to like help
Yeah.
it not be over? And so the hub became sort of the natural extension of our courses, but now it's sort of become its own thing as well. And there's a really great community inside the hub.
Okay, so you can find community there, but you can also find like learning resources, I guess, as you wait
Exactly.
for whatever course it is that you want to jump into. Um,
Exactly.
and then in 2024, will your flagship course open?
I have not decided yet on exact dates and on exactly what we're going to be doing. So the best thing for folks who are interested and wondering about it is to get on my email list,
Okay.
because that way you can always like our word nerds, that's what I call folks on my email list and my community. Word nerds always hear about what's happening next first.
Okay.
So they always get the inside scoop.
And so they can go to diymfa.com and they can get on the mailing list.
Yes, the best place to go is diymfa.com/join, JOIN. And that page will, you can just sign up for the newsletter. You'll actually get our starter kit as part of that as
Oh,
well. So
fun.
it's like a little like kit that dips your toe into each of the three pillars: the writing, the reading, and the community. And so it's like kind of a nice primer for all of DIY MFA stuff.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, we will have the links in the show notes. We'll have the diymfa.com/join for the newsletter, and then we'll have, I'm sure, a link going straight to the hub, and then we'll have all your other links, the DIY MFA radio. People can go binge on your podcast, and then they can connect with you on, I'm sure, social media. What is the social media you're on the most, or do you try to
So
avoid it?
I kind of avoid social
Yeah,
media.
I think we're all getting to that point where we're like, nah, you'll find me in the hub, guys. You'll find Gabriela in the hub. So-
That's really, I mean, really, that's where I hang out, and like the email list. So
Right,
like the
right.
newsletter is really like the best way to connect with me is through the newsletter.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Gabriela, for coming on and talking with us. I feel like we could talk more craft. We'll have to have you on again sometimes, but thank you for telling us what DIY MFA is. It sounds fascinating. I would encourage everyone to go check it out.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.